Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I'd like to thank you for once again joining us here at the Hello, Old Sports podcast. We have a very interesting and unique episode for you today, but before we begin, I just would like to remind you all to please engage with the show. Like us on Facebook, Hello Old Sports Podcast. Email us with ideas, comments, show suggestions at hellooldsports@gmail.com. And as always, please like, rate, and follow us on iTunes or on your podcast app of choice. We've got some really good episodes coming up, especially as we get into the spring and into the baseball season. And you may notice a little bit of a different voice, and I think more importantly, you may notice the lack of a specific voice here tonight. This is Dan, and I am flying solo, at least from a host point of view tonight. I do have a special guest, and I will introduce him in a moment, but Andrew is not joining us tonight. Instead, I am joined by a college roommate of mine, Ben Meyer-Abbott, and we're going to talk about something a little bit unique tonight. If you are a sports fan, and particularly if you are a sports history fan, one of the things that you probably are a fan of in one aspect or another is the idea of a simulation and simulating teams or players from across the years, across the eras to see who exactly would come out on top. And I've done quite a bit of this in my own right. I've played a number of computer games, whether it's Baseball Mogul or Out of the Park Baseball. Football Mogul is another one, Second and 10 football, Action PC football, Action PC basketball, all of these. I've also done quite a bit with PlayStation games. NBA 2K is especially one that has a lot of really good historical content. They have an all-time team, a 15-player all-time team for each of the 30 franchises in NBA history. I think you heard Andrew and I reference that a few weeks back when we did our episode on the all-time NBA starting fives for each team. MLB The Show has a number of great historical players: Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays, Ty Cobb. NHL is another one, alumni teams for all 30 or 31 NHL teams. And so I'm just a big fan of whether it's on the computer or whether it's on the PlayStation, of putting teams, whether it's specific teams or specific players, into leagues, tournaments, you name it, and simulating, seeing who comes out on top, seeing who wins, coming up with a bracket, all of that type of stuff. And if you are a baseball fan, you are probably familiar with the board game, the baseball historical board game universe. And it was one that kind of came into being 50 years ago or so now. A couple weeks ago, I was talking about my discovery and my interest in Stratomatic Baseball. And I think they just celebrated their 50th or something anniversary. And so a lot of really cool stuff you can do. And so I thought it would be cool to talk with, I guess you'd call it an aficionado of this type of thing, and that is my college roommate, Ben Meyer-Abbott, who is a fan of a game called Superstar Baseball. And to call him a fan would be probably a gross understatement. He is somewhere between a devotee and a mogul, I guess I would say, in that he not only is somebody who plays the game, but also has basically created entire new leagues and players and rule books and everything, all that type of thing. And so let me first just start off, Ben, welcome to the Hello Old Sports podcast.
Hey, Dan, thank you for having me. And it's too bad Andrew's not here, but I can tell you, I hope to be the person who shares his love of the polo grounds and represents that on the show.
He will appreciate that. Why don't you first I want to get into your background with the game, but let's talk about the game a little bit itself for those who may not know. Now, the game is called Superstar Baseball. Is that right?
Yeah, Avalon Hills Sports Illustrated Superstar Baseball.
Can you give me a little bit of the and I'm looking at the description on the web on a website on tabletopbaseball.org. It says the Avalon Hills Superstar Baseball game originally dates back to 1971 when it was called Sports Illustrated Baseball. In 1973, the all-time All-Star Baseball game was released. The game included each of the original AL and NL teams franchises with the 25 best players from each team's history, hence the name All-Time All-Star Baseball. It later became Superstar Baseball. So if you can, sort of tell us a little bit about the basics of the game, the background, the history, all that type of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, it's born out of, an era of tabletop games when there are, various types of baseball board games. You've got your Stratomatics. You've even got like All-Star Baseball, it's the one, it's got like these little discs that you put into like the batter spot and the pitcher spot, and then you'll flick a little spinner. Did you ever play that one?
I haven't played it, but I've seen it.
Yeah. And they all trade on the same ideas that you're working with percentages, which essentially is what baseball is. And then the idea is that as the manager, you can affect those percentages with the decisions that you make. And the thing that we like to tell ourselves is that we could manage a baseball team of all-time greats and beat our closest friends and family with our baseball knowledge and decisions.
So give us a little bit more about the mechanics. When you sit down to play a game, you're playing against me and we each have a team. How does it work?
Yeah, so we've each got a team. We got 25, you've got 25. You would pick your pitcher for the day. I would pick my pitcher for the day. Then we make a lineup. And then when it comes time to do the actual game, the pitcher goes first. The pitcher rolls. If there's a result based on the pitcher's card and the roll, that's the result of the play. If it's a blank, then it goes to the hitter. And whatever the result of the hitter's roll is the result of the play. The game revolves around what we call 10 to 39 dice. It's 3 different dice. One is a black die, and then there are 2 white dies. The black die has 3 3s, 2 2s, 1 1. Those are the 10 digit. And then you add up the 2 white dice together, and those can be anywhere between 0 and 9. And then you take that and you add it to the 10 dice result. So if you rolled a 2 on the black die, a 4 on one of the white die, and a 3 on one of the white die, you're looking at a 27. Then you reference it on the card, and then you see what the result is.
How long does a typical game usually last?
Well, depending on intensity, but
if nobody gets in a fight,
right.
How long does it take?
20 minutes. 20 minutes. That's also one of the things that kind of drew us to the game. Is it, you can play a game in 20 minutes, and you can do a series in an hour, or you can do a series in an hour and a half, depending. And then because of COVID and the league that we had created, obviously we weren't able to get together, and we wanted to keep it going. And so I sort of went through what I figured out I could do with Excel, and I created an Excel version of the game. And that actually gets gameplay down to like 12 minutes. And we were off and rolling. It was great.
I remember playing with you, and especially the first couple times, and I kind of needed to remind myself that I was an intelligent person and that my brain worked at a normal pace, because you would have rolled the dice and picked them up, knowing what had happened, knowing who's, so Babe Ruth's up. It's like, 27. Okay, that's a double play for him. All right. And I'm just like, okay, like, don't even. And I guess the other thing you should mention, or that I should mention, or somebody should mention, it would have to be one of the two of us, I guess. You have different splits for a left-handed pitcher versus a right-handed batter, and vice versa. So if a 33 for a guy is a home run, against a righty, it might be a double or a pop out or whatever against a lefty. So I'm sorry, we had some technical difficulties there. I was just saying that one of the things that should be noted is that sometimes, a 33 for somebody might be a home run against a right-handed pitcher, but then against a left-handed pitcher, it's a strikeout or a double or just whatever. So that's another cool feature, is that they take the lefty-righty split into account.
That's right. Yeah, you can choose to flip somebody around and really sort of try and attack their weak side, which goes into how you end up evaluating players and how you end up making managers' decisions, just as you would as a real manager. Yeah, and you weren't kidding about sort of how you described how I feel about the game. I've often described it as my family's religion, and I say that with my dad being a Methodist minister. So, and while I don't share any sort of religious sentiment, I do feel like I am an evangelist for this game. And through the years, I have tried to convert many people to what I see as the gospel of card baseball.
And just to sort of maybe close that loop, years ago when I was a part of the league, which I guess I'm a part of it again now, but years ago when I was a part of it for the first time, we went out to Ben's family's house in California to have our draft, and his father took the weekend off from his job as a minister to do the card baseball draft. So take that as what you will, as far as which
that's
which
right.
Which is the religion in the family. So I want to get into your experiences with it, but just to sort of set the table just a little bit more. This was made, I guess there were a few versions throughout the 70s and then they stopped.
Yeah, there were a couple different versions. The version that we were familiar with is the 1978 version. I think there might have been another printing in, I want to say 81, which I think might be the blue box, but I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, that's sort of the game that we go off of. And I know, yeah, like we were talking about with All-Star Baseball and Stratomatic, that everybody's got sort of their, if you're in like the baseball board game world, everybody's got their own specific flavor that they like, and the Stratomatic guys are the Stratomatic guys, and I think there's the APBA guys and all that kind of stuff. But I've always just felt like Superstar Baseball, or card baseball as we just call it, is just the simplicity of it, the rhythm of it has been more preferential for us, and how they streamline like defensive stuff. But of course, we've also spent the last 20 years also complicating it with a rule book that's expanded page on page.
So yeah, and I actually I just very recently got into Stratomatic about 6 months ago, and my wife and I went to the Hall of Fame, and I picked up a version that was the Hall of Fame version. It has cards for each Hall of Famer, and then I've since ordered subsequent sets of different players who aren't in the Hall of Fame, and there's a Negro League set and all of that type of thing. And in fact, actually just got delivered my latest sets last week. When did you first start playing the game?
The first time I remember seeing the game, not even playing the game, would be like my dad, like after he got home from work. Sometimes if he had a free moment, he would be sort of rolling a game by himself, and we sort of we'd be being like what's going on? He's like, don't worry about it, it's not for you. And
what crazy kid thinks that a board game is something that they should be interested in?
Exactly. But it was clearly, I don't know, something that was there was a level of seriousness going on that didn't lend itself to an 8-year-old being like, well, what about you're not playing a game, you're playing by yourself. How can you say you're doing that? And then it kind of disappeared for a little while. We found it in the back of a closet one year, and we brought it on out, and my dad's like, okay, I was probably like 13 at that time, and he says, maybe we all want to give this a go. And so I remember we played a game, and I think it was like the 7th inning, and Phil Rizzuto was up, and I was like super just dialed in on what decisions I wanted to be making. And I was like, yeah, we could do this. We could do this. And I think it was a week later we had our first draft. And I think you know this. I mean, there are many happy days in any sort of fantasy sports player's year, but I defy anyone to beat the happiness of the day of the draft.
I think that honestly, in a lot of ways, and I don't know, maybe this speaks just to what a dork I've been my whole life, but setting it up in a lot of ways is always the most fun.
Yes.
Setting up the league, even now when I'm, got a free night and I'm setting up a league of, on NBA 2K of the historic teams I want in there. A lot of times I'll get through setting it up and then I'll be like, I don't really feel like playing it. I remember even as a kid, my brother and I would play with our wrestling figures and we'd set up tournaments, like, 32-man wrestling tournaments. And half the time you'd play 3 matches and you'd be like, I don't really feel like doing this. But just the setting it up, like the conceptualizing of it can be the most fun. So question that I wanted to ask at the end, but I think you mentioning it as, you started like your dad telling you weren't interested, or he wasn't interested in you playing, I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
As an 8-year-old, it kind of prompts me to ask this now, and then we'll get back into sort of the historical arc. You have a daughter who is close to 7. Is that right?
Yeah, she'll be 7 in November. Yeah.
Okay. So no, it's only March. I was in Florida for a month, so it doesn't feel like it's March to me. So I apologize. But okay, so your daughter's 6.5,
Yeah.
that general age range. When will you introduce her to card baseball for the first time?
I might be breaking some news for you. She is getting involved with a sort of an apprentice team this year. She's taking over my expos.
Okay.
And we'll be, I'll be making sure that, we stay on the rails and everything, but we're talking through all the decisions. One of the proudest moments of my life was 2 weeks ago when we're chatting about what we want to do with the 31st overall pick in the second round, as every father does with their 6-year-old daughter.
Naturally.
And I said, well, there's this guy, and, we need pitching on this team. We're going to need a second baseman. We need defense. Turns out there's this guy. He does all of that. And he's fast and he's great. His name is Martin DeHigo. He plays every position and he's a pitcher. There's only one problem. And she looks at me and she's like, he's on a 1-year contract. And I was like, yep, that's exactly it.
So do you think, whether it's for your daughter or for yourself or your brothers or whoever, do you think that the game made you more of a baseball fan in general? Let me put it this way. Let me ask it. With your daughter, do you think that playing the game might make her more interested in baseball just generally?
Yes, I do. No, she's interested in it, and she's also just she just likes the fun of it. I'm excited about it. She remembers this last postseason, sort of me and her sort of staying up in her room and the lights are out, but we're on her bed and we've got the radio coming in from the other room, and it's the Padres, postseason against the Cardinals and then the Dodgers. And so she sort of just had a lot of fun experiencing baseball the old way. And of course, if you love a baseball board game like that, I'm all about, radio broadcasts. And that was one of my early memories too, driving around, listening to a doubleheader with my dad. But yeah, it's coming along and she also, the thing I love about the game too is I think about it as just like a meditation on baseball, and you can, not only are you learning about all these players and what they can do, but you're also learning about just sort of how all the players end up working together and what kind of a team you can put together. She's 6. She's seen one baseball game. I took her to a Padres game. She's got no concept. No 6-year-old does, but she does know that Ted Williams is the best player in the draft. And it's just a way of introducing, her to all that stuff. And now she knows all these names. And, we've got the 8th overall pick, and we're talking about, do we want Willie Mays? Do we want Yogi Berra? Do we want Tom Seaver? And, it just sort of, I don't know, it seeps into your blood, right?
Absolutely. So you sort of bring me to a specific point. So let's just back up a little bit again. The game that you played
Yes.
as a kid, can you tell me a little bit about, give us an idea of sort of the universe of players that were included in the game?
Yeah, so the set that we had growing up was primarily just the original 96. And then my dad augmented that set. He started a correspondence with somebody who made cards and had posted an ad for his services in one of the old like baseball board game like circulars or whatever that were available. And so they did that. And then when our family moved out to Maui in Hawaii, my dad continued that correspondence, and he would get cards from this guy, and as payment, my dad would send back like macadamia nuts and other stuff from Hawaii, which was exotic during the 80s. And so we accumulated some cards that way. And then after that, my dad made a few cards too. And by the end, I don't know how many cards we had. It wasn't a ton. But it was enough to make 2 different leagues of 4 teams each. So we had 8 teams, and we would play an NL where all 4 of us had 1 team, and we would play an AL league where all 4 of us had 1 team. And then, we would try and get to the World Series.
And so at this point, we're talking about, the big guys, the Ruth, Mantle, yes. Mays, Cy Young,
Christy Mathewson, DiMaggio.
Yeah. It's funny. One thing I remember, and it's possible that I'm remembering this wrong. I seem to remember that that DiMaggio was not in the game, and you had like a handwritten DiMaggio card.
I forget if there might have been a licensing issue with him way back when. And I don't even know if that's true or if for some reason that card got lost. But I know that in some sets, Jackie Robinson was sort of added later on. And for some reason, his card was blue in our game. Mm-hmm. And then some of I remember that Ed Delahanty was like a handmade card from the guy that my dad corresponded with. And I think DiMaggio was a handmade card too. I've still got that original set. It's one of my prized possessions.
I think it always kind of made sense with me for DiMaggio just because you always just knew him to be so protective of himself, his name, his image. And when I first saw that DiMaggio was not a regular old printed card, it just made sense to me that maybe there was some sort of a licensing issue, obviously, with his name. Was this the only game of this sort that you played, either as a kid, or have you tried other games as an adult, be it other baseball games or maybe other sports? Are you aware of anything comparable that you've actually had firsthand experience with?
Yeah. Like you, I always loved leagues. I always loved seasons, when we were doing video or computer games growing up, I was just about the sports ones where we could do seasons and stuff like that. And kind of like you growing up, you had your wrestling league. When I was tiny, I had a racing league with all my like trucks and cars. It was like a 20 game circuit where everybody played each other twice. But for the baseball stuff, I played that All-Star one, the spinner, with my brother.
Were those real players also?
Those were real players, and those were real percentages or whatever. And it really it will mess up your fingers. Like the way we went at it, we're like. And then I also remember on a church retreat with my dad, he had another board game, and this one I think was like baseball strategy or strategy baseball, and this is the one where you have like a pitcher's cards, and then you have hitter's cards, and then so the pitcher plays their card face down. The hitter plays their card face down, and the pitcher reveals whether or not they've thrown a fastball, a curveball, a changeup, a slider, a pitch out. And then the batter kind of reveals like something along the lines of a contact, swing for the fences, bunt, all that kind of stuff. And then based on those 2 variables, you look up the result. And so I remember playing that with my dad, and that was always sort of interesting and fun. But as like a 10-year-old, you're gonna get out thought by an adult all the time. Although I will say I think about that game a lot because I'm still trying to figure out ways to incorporate stuff from real baseball and stuff from other games into card baseball. And one of the things I want to be able to eventually get into the game is the pitch out, which we don't have in card baseball. But it'd be nice if we could, and that is something that I always remembered from that baseball strategy game where they had that as an option. So we played that. Yeah, we would play various baseball things, but the first time we ever sort of put together a league was shortly after I played it for the first time. And my dad's like, "Well, if you want to do that, like make up a schedule, and we'll go ahead and do that." And yeah, our first season was I think it was a 24 game season where everybody played 8 games against the other 3 teams in the league. And then I liked the old school NHL playoffs where you had to fight your way out of your own division.
Old school and 2021.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's what they've gone to with the pods because of the Canada teams and everything. Yeah. So you started this league, kind of went along. Do you have a player or maybe a player or two who from those early days was a favorite of yours in the game?
Yeah, I sponsored Hooks Wiltse on Baseball Reference. I don't know if you could still do that, but I did. I sponsored Hooks Wiltse for at least 2 years just because he was a member of 2 of my World Series winning teams, and I always thought he was like this sort of secret weapon. Turns out the guy who made him too good, and he wasn't. In reality, he wasn't as good as his card was at the time, and we've since adjusted him down and sort of put him where he should be. But I always had a soft spot for Hooks Wiltse.
Hooks Wiltse played for the Giants from 1904 to 1914. In 1908, he pitched a perfect game through 26 batters until he hit Philadelphia Phillies pitcher George McQuillan. Yes. I have to say that's a bold move when you have 26 outs against you and the other guy's pitching a no-hitter and you still send the pitcher up to bat. That's a bold that's a bold baseball decision. And this was the only occurrence of a pitcher losing a perfect game with 2 outs in the 9th inning by hitting a batter until personal hero of mine, Washington Nationals pitcher Max Scherzer did so on June 20th, 2015. But unlike Wiltse, Scherzer had a 6-0 lead. And the game was tied. It was 0-0. And they still let the pitcher hit.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, the pitcher was going to go all 14 or whatever it ended up being.
Exactly. All right, so you like Hooks Wiltse. So let's fast forward a little bit.
Wait, can I stop you?
You can.
It's stuff like that I love about this game is that you playing with some of these guys and then you look up sort of information about them just because you've been playing them and enjoying them and you come across stories like that. Mm-hmm. And it's just so fun. And I think you might remember on the original set that I had, you could on the back of the card that wasn't the playing side, they had like a biography that had like the player stats and had like sort of like a quick synopsis of what they did during their career.
Yeah. So I should, again, another digression, but that's fine. So Ben was my roommate my freshman year of college. He was a junior. I was a freshman, obviously, because that's what I just said. And he had moved in a couple days before me and had taken the room by the window. Even though, and then the rub of the story is that he would spend a lot of evenings with his then girlfriend, now wife, and mother of his daughter. And
True.
So he would not be there a lot of times. And I remember there was one afternoon, it was during the week probably, and I went to look out the window. I heard something outside or whatever. And as I was walking back, I happened to look on Ben's desk and I saw this stack of cards. And like the back of it was like something to do with, Honus Wagner and like a biography of him on the back of his thing. And I was like, you know what? This guy's not going to come home in the next couple of hours. Whatever this is, I'm taking it off his desk and I'm reading all of these little biographies because I was like, I found something with baseball history in this in this dorm room that I didn't bring in. So that was yeah. So I remember sitting and reading all of those little bios, and I think I asked you about it the next time I saw you.
It was a veteran move on my part to take the bed by the window.
Yeah, and then leave it for
and then just never use it. Yeah.
But and I think you reminded me of a point I was going to make, which is that, and Andrew and I have talked about this, and it's been discussed other places. In a lot of ways, for a number of reasons, this only really works with baseball.
Yes.
It's because the history goes so far back. And look, don't get me wrong, I love the history of other sports. I love talking about George Mikan or Red Grange or, Newt Rockne or whoever. But baseball, I think, because it's such a different sport, because the individual players sort of matter so much, and also just because of the mechanics of it, Stratomatic, and I haven't tried these, but they have games for football, basketball, hockey, and I don't know, maybe I'll try them out one day, but it just, first of all, it seems like it would be hard to capture as realistically. And second of all, it just feels like it would have to be clunky. Whereas for baseball, I feel like it works. Every player in baseball matters. If there were a card football game, how would you quantify what each linebacker meant or what each offensive lineman meant? Whereas in baseball, you can say, okay, this is the defensive rating of my team because I have a really good shortstop. I've got Ozzie Smith at shortstop, but I have, I don't know who sucked at second base, Chuck Knobloch at second base. So it's, these things, they balance each other out. So I think that's another reason why I think it works better with baseball than it does with the other sports.
I think more than all the other sports, baseball translates through the years better. You're in baseball. Baseball has gone, or baseball statisticians have gone to such lengths to sort of, take everything into account and equalize for everything, and that way you can even get a more direct comparison between the two eras of anything. Take it back to the 1890s or the 1920s and the 1950s. And you can at least, come to, maybe it's not exact, but you can come to some sort of approximation that you can absolutely work with and have a really good time with.
Absolutely. So, and I'll sort of, just kind of summarize your story here for a little while. So you kind of have this league and you're doing with your parents with your father and your brothers and everything. At some point, you made the decision that you were going to undergo sort of a real overhaul and sort of.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that, because you've now created a game with, I don't know what the number is, 10 times as many players as were in the original game. So talk to me about sort of a little bit about why you decided to do that and then kind of the process.
Yeah, I think probably the original game we had, there was enough for a 24 team leagues. I don't know what that gets you to, 200-ish players.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, it was just 4 teams in a league. 3 teams made the playoffs, and we always talked about how it would be better if, it was more like a real league, and we weren't. If you drafted Christy Mathewson in the first round, you wouldn't be able to get Ty Cobb in the second round because, he wouldn't be there after, 20 teams or whatever. And so in the back of our heads, we always sort of had this dream of a bigger league. And of course, bigger league meant more players. And we always wanted to sort of expand our knowledge of who these players were and just incorporate them into the league and see all the stuff that they could do. So then, I don't know, a couple years after college, I just sort of decided that was something that I wanted to do. And then on every day on the way to work, I would be on the train and I'd have my clipboard out and I would have the card clipped to one side of it. And then I was writing out basically the mathematical information behind the cards, because with those 10 to 39 die, you've essentially got 216 possible combinations of what can happen. And then so you use those combinations to create percentages that are based on those players' careers. And when we did the math for the original game, we sort of figured out where they were placing everybody. And then we expanded the number of players, and we did all the math for that. And when that was all done, we had a 20-team league and 743 players.
And is that where it stands today, the 743?
Yeah.
I want to circle back to that number in a second because I have a clarifying question to ask on that. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. How did you go about deciding which players you wanted to include?
In short, it came down to, should you know about this person?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a baseball fan, should you know who Pie Traynor is? Yes. And should you know who Eddie Collins is? Yes. Should you know who Hardy Richardson is? Yes. And then when we were doing the big expansion is when in the original came to me, we had Satchel Paige and we had Josh Gibson from the Negro Leagues, but that was it. But then in the expansion, we made sure to include every Negro League player who was in the Hall of Fame and do a deep dive into them. And that honestly was one of the most fun things about the entire process is learning about guys like Turkey Stearnes, Willie Wells, Pop Lloyd, Ray Dandridge, Oscar Charleston, all these guys, and sort of appreciating what they were and what they could do, and reflecting on just the utter crime it was that they were denied the ability to compete in Major League Baseball, and how we all missed out because of it. And that's I think about that a lot when I'm playing with these guys, because it's just it's like Turkey Stearnes hit 300 this year. In our league where league average is like 230, and I was like, Turkey Stearnes is amazing, and I can't believe that more people don't know that Turkey Stearnes is amazing.
Were there Negro Leaguers in the original game?
No. I think the only one was an addition, and that was Jackie.
Yeah,
Jackie Robinson. Yeah.
Now, obviously, whatever the reasons were, the other thing is that the discovery of the statistics about the Negro Leagues has just been incredible. How much they've been able to dig up, even in the last 20 years or so. And I've mentioned a few times on this podcast that I help out with Baseball by the Book, the Justin McGuire's podcast. And one of the books I read for him over the fall, and I actually read it the weekend I was in Cooperstown, so that was kind of cool, was a book called Negro Leaguers and the Hall of Fame by an author whose name escapes me at the moment. So I apologize for that. I'll put it in the show notes. And he makes the case for like 24 Negro Leaguers who aren't in the Hall of Fame who should be guys like Spot Poles and Home Run Johnson and Cannonball Redding and probably some other guys who don't have this memorable nickname, so I'm not remembering them at the moment. So I did a little research. I pulled out my cards, and here's just 4 names of guys that are in the game that you put in. Bib Falk.
Yep.
Tioga Burns.
Sure, George. Yeah.
Fielder. Oh, that was George Burns from the New York Giants?
Yep.
Okay, so I know who he is. Fielder Jones, who I believe was on the White Sox at the beginning of the 20th century. I think he was on that Hitless Wonders White Sox team of like 1906.
That sounds right.
And Clay Carroll, who's a relief pitcher, who I think is probably from the 50s or 60s, I'd imagine. But
yeah, I think so. I always get goofed up. Sometimes I say the 20s, sometimes I say the 50s. Clay Carroll was my mop-up guy on my team this year. Yeah.
So, point being, you went really deep.
Yes.
You went Negro Leagues, you went 19th century. How far back in the 19th century did you go?
Well, I think we get back into the 1870s because we added John Montgomery Ward. Mm-hmm. Roger Connor's in there. He might be the 1890s.
I think you even have George Wright.
Yeah, George Wright, absolutely.
George Wright, who was one of sort of the founding. He's in the Hall of Fame both as a player and as a pioneer. He and his brother Harry Wright. His brother Harry Wright, who's like 10 years older than him, and they were both players. But George was the one who was a player for longer with the team that eventually is the modern day Atlanta Braves, which was the Boston Bean Eaters in the 1870s. I think George Wright is sort of the longest player going back that's in the Hall of Fame. So, yeah, you really went back. You really went into the Negro Leagues and even have a couple of Japanese players.
Yeah. We ended up one year we added Sadaharu O and Masaichi Kaneda. And Masaichi Kaneda is the best pitcher in Japanese history. And then after that, we added, I think, 3 more. We added Shigeo Nagashima, who was a third baseman, Katsuya Nomura, who's a catcher, and Isao Harimoto, who's this outfielder.
Him I've heard of.
And yeah, Harimoto is probably the best hitter other than Sadaharu. And the idea that these are people that you should know. I mean, not only was Harimoto this just amazing hitter, Harimoto was born in Korea, but his family moved to Japan sometime prior to the end of World War II, and he was actually in Hiroshima and survived the A bomb.
Jeez.
And to go on and become one of the greatest hitters in Japanese baseball history. And so is this somebody as a baseball fan who you should know? Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot of fun doing the research on these guys and finding out about these guys. Yeah, and sort of just figuring out what they can do and also where you should draw the line. So one of the things I did for this off season was I did like a league-wide speed evaluation for every player in the league, so that they could be we could make sure that all their speeds were being judged on the same criteria, because it was kind of all over the place when we got it. And like I was saying, the cards made by one guy might have been different than the cards that my dad made, might have been different than the ones from the original set. So we set about just trying to figure that out, and then you do things, and you find out that over the first or over their 5 best stolen base seasons, Ricky Henderson, Billy Hamilton, and Vince Coleman stand head and shoulders over anybody else. And then you've got people like Dan Brouthers, who I didn't know really had as much speed as he did. You do all that research for yourself, and I wouldn't have done that research if it weren't for this game.
You mentioned Dan Brouthers. Those of you who have been to the Hello Old Sports webpage on the Sports History Network website will know that my picture is from this summer. It is me at the grave site of Dan Brouthers in Wappingers Falls, New York. He was born and raised and obviously later buried in my hometown, where Andrew, the general area where Andrew still lives. So we are well familiar with Dan Brouthers here on Hello Old Sports. Before we move on, I just want to, and I think I've done this privately with you, if you ever expand into other Japanese players, I want to put in a plug for a guy by the name of Victor Starrfin, who, as you might imagine from his name, was not born and raised Japanese. His nickname was actually the Blue-Eyed Japanese. He was an ethnic Russian baseball player in Japan and the first professional pitcher in Japan to win 300 games, 83 career shutouts, which ranks number 1 all time in Japanese professional baseball. Died at a young age, died at only 40 years old. And I discovered him sort of like you were talking about with this game about people who make rosters in OOTP and out of the park baseball. There's guys that, put together rosters and everything. And I downloaded a Nippon League, which is what the Japanese league is. I downloaded a roster of sort of all stars from the history of those leagues. And so Victor Starrfin is somebody I would definitely recommend putting in. So just to put in a plug. And then I guess also if I have to add a second one, is a guy by the name of Eiji Sawamura, who was a baseball player with Japanese. He actually was killed in the Second World War, but he was known for, in an exhibition, he struck out. I think it was Ruth Gehrig. Hank Greenberg, I think, might have been one of them. It was like the same year that Carl Hubble had done something very similar, but he struck out a bunch of future Hall of Famers in a row. So Sawamura, but especially Victor Starrfin, are 2 guys that I would very highly recommend.
Yeah, there's nothing we enjoy more than finding new guys that we can include in the league. And those guys sound great. They sound perfect.
Okay, so you're putting together these new cards. And I know you talked a little bit about this, but you talked about what you do when you're sort of trying to figure out who the players should be. How do you go about making a card? Like, you look at somebody, do you look at their whole career? Do you look at sort of, the peak X number of years? How do you do that?
Yeah, when I was putting together the big expansion, there's the internet is a beautiful thing, and there were groups that really sort of laid out all the math behind everything, and they also talked about how those cards were made for the original set and how they did it for their own sets. And that's kind of the fun thing about everybody who does this. We're all very sort of individualistic and sort of what we are looking to do and how we like to do things. I know that there are some people like you who like the out of the park baseball, where you're kind of recreating, the actual baseball year by year. Mm-hmm. And then there are other stuff where it's like, I like the idea of, can I trade Ty Cobb for Ryan Sandberg? I wouldn't do that trade, but
yes, you should.
No, wouldn't do that. But something like that. But so for me, when I was making the cards, and then I found out the basic math behind the game. But we in essence we take a player's whole career, and then we also look at other things like how many points they hit above league average, how much their slugging percent was above league average. For defense, we're looking at Gold Gloves essentially as imperfect as that is, and then with the more modern players we can incorporate that stuff too, and then with the speed stuff, it's you just try and find something that you can apply to everybody.
I'm sure there's an anecdotal element to it, especially with guys who there aren't a ton of stats out there, for instance, especially when you start, and that's just what kind of leads into my next question. We talked about how Negro League stats have gotten a lot better, but they're still not what they are for the major, the American National League, and maybe similar with some of the 19th century guys. So I'd imagine that was sort of involved qualitative research as well.
Yeah, that was a lot of the fun of it too, is that we couldn't necessarily rely just on the stats with all that. Although, you're absolutely right, the stats are getting better. It was a lot of research into sort of stories about these guys and when they competed against major leaguers and how great they did. And I remember when I was putting together Pop Lloyd's card, and I saw a story when, somebody talked to Babe Ruth, and they said, hey, Babe, who's the greatest player of all time? And Babe's like, well, I mean, are you talking about just like the white players or everybody? And they're like, everybody. And he's like, Pop Lloyd. Stuff like that really like drives home the idea that these guys could play and they should have been able to play. Mm-hmm. And it's just so fun to have them in the league now. And by God, if our season 7 champions didn't have Pop Lloyd and Babe Ruth on the same team.
That's one of the great things about baseball. And obviously you have to be careful how you say this, because obviously, the Negro Leagues were born out of something very negative, very ugly, segregation and prejudice and those things. And I certainly don't want to undersell just how brutal that was. But there's just so much to discover when you dive into baseball history, whether it's the Negro Leagues or whether it's, the 19th century guys, or, I read a book over the summer about the 19th century World Series and about how, the National League would play the American Association every year. And then later on, when the American Association was gone, they would do just the two teams, the two top teams in the National League. And you're reading about the Detroit Wolverines and Pretzels Geitzen and all these guys who you just, you wouldn't have known about. And again, I say this not to denigrate other sports. I'll talk to you about the Lombardi Packers all day long and think that's great. But baseball has this special thing where it's like, and then even if you get a little bit into the Japanese leagues and all that stuff, like there just seems to always be more great players and teams that you can just find. And that is what makes being a baseball fan so much fun. And I think it's also part of what makes something like this so much fun, is that there's always more guys that you can discover. And I think that brings me to my next question, which is, are there specific players in the game? I'm sure there are. Give me the names of some guys who maybe are really good guys to have in the game who you maybe wouldn't think of. I mean, obviously you want Ruth and Williams and Mathewson and, Walter Johnson and whoever else, but do you have some names of some guys who maybe, whether it's Negro League guys or just more obscure guys who are big time gets in the league, but maybe people may not have heard of as much?
I guess I would say the first name that comes to mind is Ed Delahanty. who played on the Philadelphia Phillies in the 1890s, and then I think the Washington Senators very briefly after that, before he died in the middle of a baseball season.
His death combines baseball and railroads, two of my great loves.
He just combines so many different things, speed, defense at a position where you don't typically get a lot of defense in the outfield, and also just, being able to hit. And he was one of the first guys that I remember my dad would pick and who he didn't know anything about. And then he would just use Ed Delahanty to just wreck us. And so it's like, oh, okay, Ed Delahanty. This one's not like a secretive name or anything like that, but I guess I didn't really have a full appreciation of Andre Dawson, honestly, until I had him on my team in the league, and I could see the power, the speed, and the defense all working together, even though he might not have had like a batting average that sort of screams out to you as something that you would want on your team. And Willie Wells is
Negro League shortstop.
Negro League shortstop. People might not know him, but he's really great. I mentioned Hardy Richardson before. I've had him on my team, I think, the last 3 years.
Who was Hardy Richardson?
Hardy Richardson was he's primarily a second baseman from like the 1890s, and just, really fast. He played a lot of different positions, none of them all that well, but he was fast and he could hit. And then, depending on how you use these guys, you can do any number of things with them. It's like, I think about, you think about the totality of baseball. And so on my team with Hardy Richardson, I have him batting ninth against right-handers because he's better against left-handers, but I want his speed connecting to the top of the lineup, and I have him hitting behind the pitcher, which is the concept that was popularized like 100 years later by Tony La Russa and Joe Madden and others. And just the idea that, you could have Hardy Richardson being used in this modern role and seeing what he might be in a different era is just captivating to me.
That name is a blast from the past, Tony La Russa. I remember when he was a manager. Oh, wait, no, never mind. That's an interesting hire. It's got to be the first time a Hall of Famer has ever been hired to manage. It's not like basketball where these guys go into the Hall of Fame and then still coach for another 20 years, but that's a little bit of a digression. The other thing, you mentioned Andre Dawson. He's got an interesting thing. I think he and A-Rod are the only two guys ever to win an MVP on a last place team. I believe there may be somebody, but those are the two that immediately come to mind. I think those are some good ones. So what about modern guys? When was the last update?
So the speed update that's been going on this last off season basically has changed the speed of 128 players out of the 743. And honestly, it's been really interesting to see because, you change some of these guys' speed and all of a sudden you look at them differently. We had Jeter at a 3-speed, and because of the research, he's going to be a 4-speed in the game. And honestly, it's going to make all the difference. It's going to make stealing so much more accessible for him. And now you look at Jeter where for some reason in the game wasn't reflecting sort of, his real value. I think now that he's a 4-speed, I think it will. And then we had somebody like Dan Brouthers, who was a 2-speed for some reason. This is all very inside card baseball, but he's going to go up to a 4-speed. And all of a sudden you're looking at another guy who I would look at in the same category as like a George Sisler, just without the defense. But for some of the modern guys, who else would be good?
I guess my question is also, when was the last time you added new players?
Oh, yeah. So the last player who was in the league was Ichiro. Yeah, we haven't added anybody basically in the last 10 years. And that's more because we were making sure that we were, getting all the players that we had sort of set. We've got a whole list of guys that we would like to bring into the league. And we've got, as you know, a whole list of guys who are banned from the league because we kicked out the steroid guys a couple of years ago.
That was my next question. Who would you really like to see of the guys who are playing now? Who do you really want to see added? I mean, I guess I can guess, Trout and Miguel Cabrera, guys who are definitely going to the Hall of Fame, that type of thing. So Who would you like to see added in the future from the present?
Let's see. I've got a list. Potential or possible. Let's see. New players. Joe Mauer, actually, I was excited about.
MVP.
And exactly. Adrian Beltre, Scott Rowland, Clayton Kershaw, obviously. But a lot of this too is like while we're going through and doing some of the research, it'll lead us to some of these old guys. Like I want to get Al Lopez in the game, who was, I think, a member of the Dodgers in the 40s, if I'm not mistaken.
Lopez was older than that. I think he was from the 30s.
Okay.
Because he then went. He's in the Hall of Fame, Lopez.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe we.
As a manager, though, he's in.
Okay.
He managed the Indians and then he managed the White Sox. He was the only from 47 to 64. He was the only manager to beat out the Yankees for an AL pennant because he managed in 48. He managed the Indians. And that was the team. That was the team that won the World Series. That was the last Indian team to win the World Series with Feller and Bob Lemon, Larry Doby's rookie year, and Satchel Paige was on that team. You talk about Negro Leaguers, and Lou Boudreau was the player manager, Hall of Famer at shortstop, owned by Bill Veeck. And then in 54, he managed the Indians again. He was still managing the Indians. That was the team that won like 111 games. But then got swept in the World Series by the Giants. Willie Mays makes the catch, et cetera, et cetera. And then by 59, he was the manager of the White Sox, the go-go White Sox of the late 50s, Aparicio, Nellie Fox, Ted Klaczewski, that whole team. And so he was the only manager for whatever it was, 18 seasons, 19 seasons, who beat the Yankees for a pennant 3 times. So, yeah, good player. Really good manager. He's in the Hall of Fame as a manager. So, yeah, that's who Al Lopez was.
That's all. Yeah, it's stuff like that that's just amazing because you're going through some of these guys, and I came across his name. I mean, I should have come across his name because he's in the Hall of Fame, but I came across his name when we were doing basically a league-wide look at a catcher's ability to throw a runner out, which is represented in the game by a bar. Just like a line on the catcher's card, and it knocks the runner's speed down 1. And we were, looking at the concept of adding not just in the original game, you could either have 1 bar or no bars. And then we were looking at the idea of, well, that's a very, binary thing. Are there more segments to this? And we ended up, finding guys who should have 2 bars, guys who should have 3 bars. And then coming across 2 guys in baseball history who just stand head and shoulders above everybody else and throwing people out. And that's Ivan Rodriguez and Yadier Molina.
I'd imagine Molina will be a pretty quick entry whenever you come around to it.
Yeah, I can't wait to get Molina into the game as another 4-bar catcher. But during this process, I came across Al Lopez, and he is a 2-bar catcher, and that's a guy who can throw people out, really well. And that's another thing about like the game that I really enjoyed is that like in the process of this research, you had some of these defensive catchers in history that made sense on all these real baseball teams where you're going to take a Ray Schalk, you're going to take a Jim Sundberg, guys who can play defense and throw people out even if they can't hit for anything, but they have value. And so, in our research, we see that value, and then we try and figure out a way to make it show through in the game because we want the game to reflect, real baseball at the end of it. And the thing that we always talk about, and, obviously, we're a little biased, but we always talk about how card baseball just sort of reflects, actual baseball in so many ways. And in one of the ways that I like to think about too is in our early years, we were just, we're playing hunches. You know, we didn't know any of the math behind the cards. We knew that 34s and 35s were rolled more than 15s and 16s and 19s. But we just were playing these hundreds, and we pick guys because, you know, we think that home runs get rolled more on 24s and such like that. And it's all the stuff that wasn't there was no evidence behind it other than what we could see. And then through the years, as we've all gotten, you know, very serious about it, we've got these just databases and spreadsheets with all these numbers, and we've switched to like advanced metric stuff. And it's just, it's mirrored in our mind. It's mirrored, you know, baseball transitioning from those early years where, you know, you're like, you do this because, you know, it works. But nowadays, you know, everybody's like, no, you put your, you know, best hitter in the 2 spot because, you know, you're not only are you going to get him attached to the top of the lineup, but you're going to benefit off of his on-base percentage, and you know, the power will come if you have a guy in 9 spot 2, and you can pick up RBIs that way.
A strategy that the Yankees have embraced with Aaron Judge over the last few years, I have to say. So,
yeah, I honestly, when I saw the major league teams doing that, I started taking a look at that too, and I made the switch with my team. And Joe DiMaggio sat in the number 2 spot all year.
Well, especially when I do, because I've done it both with card baseball, which I'm looking at my set over my shoulder here, and then I'm also looking at my Stratomatic over my computer. When you do an all-time Yankee team, DiMaggio is a perfect 2-hitter because he sets the table for Ruth and Mantle and Gehrig and the rest of them, and he gives you a righty in the 2 slot that breaks up all the guys that hit lefty. So
I really liked the episode that you guys did on the 30 best National League and the 30 best Yankee players from New York early on. That was fun for me. I had a good time with that one.
We had a lot of fun doing that. We have a lot of fun with these lists. We try and mix it up a little bit. We don't do all lists because, you know, we want to get sort of more of a deep dive type of thing. But we had a lot of fun with that. That was a good one to lead off with, and we actually used out of the park baseball to simulate a playoff series between the two teams, which the National League team swept in 4 games, believe it or not. We were a little surprised by that, but, you know, hey, no simulation is perfect, right?
That listen, in my mind, I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's just baseball, or as we would say, that's just card baseball. I've assembled teams that I thought would just destroy the league, and, you know, didn't make the playoffs or got swept, and yeah.
How many times in baseball does the best team not win in the championship? And meanwhile, in the other sports, football and basketball especially, hockey's a little quirky because, you know, you can get a hot goalie or the puck bounces the wrong way, but it's rare for the best team to lose in the NBA Finals or to lose in the Super Bowl. Happened a couple of years with the Patriots, with the Giants, which I'm eternally thankful for. But by and large, it doesn't seem to happen. Whereas in baseball, you know, I mean, the Yankees in 2000, they were like an 85 win or something win team, and then they basically ran through the playoffs, beat the Mets in 5 games in the World Series, and so it's another sort of baseball is just so quirky in that way that any team can beat another team in a game. If the Yankees lose to whoever the worst team is in the American League right now, Kansas City or whoever, it's not a big story. Meanwhile, if the Lakers lose to the Washington Wizards, it's a big deal. If the Chiefs lose to the Jets, it's a big deal. But in baseball, with so many games and so many, you know, the margins are so close that it's not unfathomable for a team to lose. You know, I think George Will in Ken Burns' Baseball said the best team loses a third of the time, the worst team wins a third of the time, and then you're fighting over that middle third. So baseball is a lot of fun in that regard, and in a lot of other regards as well. So talk to me a little bit about the band, not music, but the BANNED. You exclude some steroid guys and maybe some others. Why?
We exclude just the steroids guys. People like Pete Rose are in the game, although thing that I was reading about him basically playing his entire career with a corked bat casts a little bit of an aspersion on his presence in the game. But like Joe Jackson's in the game, Pete Rose is in the game, essentially because It's different from steroids, at least in our minds, because steroids basically just destroy the accurate reflection of these stats. You've got players who, pre-steroids, they were good. I mean, heck, even great in the case of like Barry Bonds, but they weren't, stratospheric better than Babe Ruth. I went through the trouble when all that was happening to try and figure out which were their steroid years, which were the not steroid years, and create cards that sort of took the steroids out of them so that we could still sort of have them in the game. But then my dad, who's the commissioner, he's like, don't worry about it. They're just gone. We're not going to have them in the league. And for me, we've enjoyed it. We've enjoyed not having them in the game. And it's been nice as a way to think about, I think it's fine that they're not in the Hall of Fame, because I'm not interested in people who cheat at the steroid level being in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I understand that, gamesmanship or some form of cheating has been a part of baseball since the beginning. But for me, there was something about steroids that was different, and it destroys the integrity of these players compared to other guys. And honestly, it feels like we've been better off without them. And it's informed some of my feeling about them not being included in the Hall of Fame as well.
I actually have, I think, the set that you had printed up for me years ago. I think I have those guys. I at least have Bonds and Clemens.
Yeah, you've got Bonds, Clemens, you've got Manny Ramirez, you've got A-Rod, you've got Mark McGwire.
Mm-hmm. And all of those are out for...
Yep.
I'd imagine that you don't see that changing anytime soon.
No, I don't. I couldn't see letting them back in. No. I mean, that's the other thing about baseball when you talk about why baseball works, at least on this, in terms of this board game and just sort of in general, is that the stats were the stats. And, they would fluctuate through the years. The league average, would get up to 290. During the 1930s, and then drop, all the way to what was it 245 last year, something like that?
Yeah.
And it goes up and down all like that. And that's what baseball, is that not only was it, you're discovering about these players and the stories, but the stats mattered. The stats mattered, like these things, they were important, at least to me. But, Joe DiMaggio's streak at 56 is an important number. Hank Aaron's home run record, which I still consider to be the real home run record of 75 or 755, is a sacred number. And steroids just destroyed that. They destroyed the meaning of all these other these sort of sacred numbers or things that I felt were sacred about baseball. And so I haven't had a problem. I remember I thought it was like a little weird that we were going to kick all these guys out. I liked having Barry Bonds on a team, it was a good time, but we haven't been any worse for the wear. And honestly, I don't think baseball is any worse for the wear without them in the Hall of Fame.
I've expressed my opinion on the podcast before about how there was a time when I was almost militant about not having these guys in. I've now decided that it will probably be better for the future of the Hall of Fame just to let them in, because it's become such an issue that, and really you're only really talking about three guys: Bonds, Clemens, and A-Rod. I think if you let those three guys in, I don't think anybody's going to beat the drum for McGwire. I certainly don't think anybody's going to beat the drum for Rafael Palmeiro or Sosa or any of these other guys. Ortiz is an interesting case because he only tested positive the one time, but he also played most of his career in a time where there was testing, so you have to assume that he was clean for most of his career. And then also, when you talk about a Hall of Fame type of thing, Ortiz, he also has the DH thing working against him. But I don't know. Personally, I think that if Edgar Martinez is a Hall of Famer, then David Ortiz with his 3 World Series titles is sure as hell a Hall of Famer. But we will see.
Well, I'm also the guy who would like to contract the Hall of Fame, because I don't think Rabbit Mirandil should be in the Hall. I don't think some of these guys are despite maybe what they were in the old days.
And I agree with that. I just think the ship has sailed with that, which is why people say, "Oh, well, you're a big Hall guy or a small Hall guy." I'm like, And Andrew and I talked about this on our episode. He said, well, people talk about, oh, well, nobody ever bought a ticket to see so-and-so. It's like, okay, so you're going to have a Hall of Fame of just Ruth, Mays, Cobb, and one or two other guys. It's like there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame. I do think that the Harold Baines thing kind of really makes things interesting because there's other guys. I mean, I always talked about Mattingly. I mean, you're going to tell me that Mattingly, with his MVP awards and, 6 years where he was one of the best 2 or 3 players in baseball, you're going to tell me he didn't have a better career than Harold Baines? Tough, but
I think Mattingly. Well, actually, I'd have to look at his career totals again. But Mattingly's peak was way better than Baines' peak for sure,
without question. So I don't think this is going to work. I was trying to hold this up. I don't know if you can see that. The question is, do I get a speed reevaluation?
Oh yeah. What is your speed? What is your speed?
I was a 2. So.
You were a 2. Wow, that was generous.
I was going to say, actually, at this point, I don't know if I want the evaluation.
I was a 2 when you were in college. Now, I don't know, man. I think you're maxing out at a 1.
What he was talking about is he did a manager card for me, and it had there's no stats on it or anything, but it does have a speed rating, and he gave me a 2 out of 5 for speed, which is probably generous. So
when you got the joke. Because I made the card and I just I made the joke for myself because that's how all the cards would be. And when you got the joke, I was like, oh he's in.
It's one of those jokes that you plant and then it blooms at some point. It's not an immediate payoff.
Yeah.
All right. So before we go, maybe just tell us a little bit about where you are with the league these days. Obviously, everything's done remotely and the real sort of participation happens at the GM level. The games are sort of rolled by one person playing both teams by and large, I would imagine. But just give us an idea of kind of where you are with your card baseball, superstar baseball league at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we've got the 20 teams. They're spread out of 5 teams in 4 divisions. Yeah, the regular season. Well, the divisions were made so that basically everybody who's in one area is in a division together. And what during the pre-pandemic days when we could get together and play, we would. And then just for the interest of speed, because we play like a series a month, and so that means that a season takes 2 years to complete. It's just we just do a slow burn on that kind of stuff. And so we have the draft. Everybody, we've got 17 people who have teams, 17 different people who have teams. We've got a couple of us who have 2 teams just to get to the 20. But the dream is obviously to get to one team, one player, one team, or one manager, one team. And everybody acts as a general manager. And then if we have to play the games by ourselves, we will play them straight up, because what good is a league or a competition if you're not actually seeing if a team with Willie Wells and Ichiro Suzuki can beat a team with Ted Williams and Ted Williams and Wade Boggs. Turns out they could. They did one year.
And you use the honor system. If I'm rolling my team against somebody else's team, you trust that somebody's going to manage both teams to the best of their ability.
Absolutely. There was a year when my friend Damon, he couldn't play in the playoffs, and I managed his team to a playoff victory over one of my teams, and then a playoff victory over my other team.
Which is why you will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Who is it that they always used to say that? I think it was Bear Bryant. They used to always say he could take his and beat yours, and then he could take yours and beat his, and that applies to you in the card baseball realm, I would say.
You're very kind, man. And I'm looking forward to having you for season 10 coming up next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Season 10, incidentally, when The Simpsons should have stopped, but that's another conversation for another day. So, all right. Well, this was great. Talk a little bit about baseball history, not just about the game and, the mechanics, but also why baseball and its history and its characters and its players and its stats and all of those things, just why everything is so unique and why baseball, as much as I love the other sports, why baseball lends itself to this type of thing in a way that other sports maybe don't quite as much. So, Ben Meyer-Abbott, I would like to thank you for joining us again here on Hello Old Sports.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Anytime I can talk about card baseball, please.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Please, a reminder just to check us out. Email us at hellooldsports@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook. Follow us, like us, rate us, leave a comment on iTunes or whatever your podcast app of choice is. Andrew will be back with me next week talking about some sort of sports history topic or another. But until next time, for Ben Meyer-Abbott, I'm Dan Newman. Goodbye, old sports. Hi, everybody. It's Dan here. We strive for accuracy above all else here on the Hello Old Sports podcast. And if you were listening closely to today's episode, you may have noticed that I made a little mistake concerning the managerial career of Hall of Famer Al Lopez. I said that he managed the Indians in 1948 and 1954, both of their American League pennant-winning years. That's actually not the case. The manager in 1948 was a player manager and Hall of Famer by the name of Lou Boudreau. Lopez didn't come to the team until the early 1950s, and he did manage the Indians to their 1954 American League pennant and then moved on to the Chicago White Sox and managed them to the pennant in 1959, losing in the World Series both years. So I apologize for the error. If you listen closely and you know your baseball history, which hopefully most of you do if you're listening to the Hello Old Sports podcast, you may have noticed that little error, so just wanted to hop on here real quick at the end and correct the record. Thank you as always for listening to the Hello Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.